This podcast is about anything and everything that gets us better at making things good and good at making things better. It's called extreme stewardship, because the first thing to say about getting better at making things good and good at making things better is that both we ourselves and whatever we're working on don't belong to us. We are stewards of what is God's, not owners of what is ours. And in a world that prioritizes getting as the ultimate good and self as the ultimate end, that's pretty extreme. This is episode 12, where I talk about the problem. I don't know how much I need to say in this episode. Work is messed up. You knew that, and so did everyone else. By the way, I don't name a lot of specific resources in this podcast, but there are 2 books out there that do a great job of going deep on this topic. The first is by Tim Keller. It's called Every Good Endeavor. It's basically a theology of work, but the middle section, about 75 pages long, is about how sin messes up our work. The other is by Cornelius Plantinga. It's called Not the Way It's Supposed to Be. It's a book about sin, and it does an incredible job of showing just how deeply and thoroughly sin penetrates our existence. Both of these books are written by really smart people who know how to communicate simply and powerfully to the rest of us, so I would recommend them to you if you're interested in the deep dive. All right, back to Genesis. God gives Adam and Eve 2 jobs. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Work the land, and have kids so there will be more people to work the land. And do both of these things in relationship with one another and with God Himself. Each of these components is precisely targeted when God pronounces the consequences of sin in Genesis 3. Eve's job of having kids is going to get harder. That's Genesis 3:16. Adam's job of working the land is going to get harder. That's Genesis 3 verses 17 through 19. Adam and Eve aren't going to get along with each other. Back to Genesis 3:16. And God is kicking them out of His garden. Genesis 3:22 to 24. Everything about work is tainted. The work itself, the training of other people to do the work when we're gone, our relationships with coworkers, and our relationship with the owner who has appointed us his stewards. Imagine a job where you don't like the work, you're generally unsuccessful at doing the work, you can't find anyone to replace you, you can't stand the people you work with, and you have no relationship at all with the boss. Who wants that job? And yet, in some sense, that's the job we're stuck with. Notice how the consequences of sin on our work assume that we are going to keep working. God does not take away our responsibility to improve creation. The curse is not that we lose our job, but that our job is going to be much more difficult. This is why Proverbs is full of expressions of a basic fact of life. If you don't work, eventually you won't eat. And if you don't eat, eventually you will die. But therein lies the problem, because Genesis 3 is also clear that even if you do work, eventually you will die. You will try to bring the dirt under your control, and you will fail. And not only will you fail to bring the dirt under your control, in the end, the dirt will bring you under its control. From dust you are, and to dust you will return. So God creates Adam and Eve to do work that is enjoyable and meaningful and successful, but thanks to sin, work is not going to be enjoyable, meaningful, or successful. In fact, it's going to be what Ecclesiastes calls it, meaningless. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? And then a little later in Ecclesiastes 2, he says, I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What do people get for all their toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. If you've ever tried to accomplish anything, you've experienced the frustration of work that turns out, at least in the moment, to be meaningless. We are playing the infinite game, and we are losing. We win some battles occasionally, but we all eventually lose the war, because our opponent in that war is death. Death is decomposition, disintegration of what God intended to be integrated.
There's nothing productive, orderly, beautiful, fun, or virtuous about death. The world would be more of all of these things if death didn't exist. So what's the payoff? We all know about meaningless work, and we all know about death. There is a happy ending to this story, but we're not there yet. That's next episode. Right now, we need to sit in the garbage heap with Job for a minute and grapple with the futility of our labors. Maybe the first thing to face head-on is that some effects of sin on our work are outside of our control, but some effects of sin on our work, maybe more than we care to admit, are inside of our control. This is where a little Jocko goes a long way. It's called taking responsibility for me. What role did I play in the failure of that project? Pull the thread, trace it back, and 99% of the time there's a moment where I didn't do my part. Maybe it was a failure of communication. Maybe it was a failure of expectation. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was laziness. Maybe it was ignorance. Whatever it was, it's on me. The problem with self-awareness when it comes to sin is that sin is an autoimmune disorder. It compromises the very system put in place to fight it. Self-awareness through self-analysis is a myth. No one has it. People who are self-aware precisely because they invite other people to analyze them, to advise them, to speak truth to them. And if I could take this just one level deeper, sin is not only really good at making me unreceptive to input from others, it specifically attacks my ability to listen to that one person who is most likely to be helpful to me in that moment. And there might be a lesson in that. From whom am I least interested in receiving critical feedback right now? That's very possibly the person who perceives me most clearly and whose input I most need. So my self-awareness starts with recognition of my lack thereof. And if I have the humility to say, I can't know myself by myself, I can also have the humility to ask others to speak into things. And if I can see, with some help, where I was the problem, maybe I can see how to become more of the solution. Recognizing sin's effects on our labor also probably ought to encourage us to be patient with ourselves and with each other. Sin messes up our work. Part of that dynamic is me being a sinner. And part of that dynamic is sin, capital S, sin being alive and well in the world and infiltrating every level of our existence. Sin rules this world, and sin hates productivity, beauty, order, virtue, and fun. Being surprised when sin interferes with our work is as dumb as being surprised when gravity kicks in. My kids are sinners. Of course they don't want to do their chores. My boss is a sinner. Of course she asks the impossible and wants it done yesterday. Of course things go wrong. Of course things fall apart. The last emotion we should ever experience when things go badly is shock. Shocking is things going well. Surprising is when work works at all. So let's be patient with each other and with ourselves when sin ruins our work. Not apathetic, not lazy, but patient. And of course, we should be all the more thankful when things do go as they should, when a project does turn out good. Echoes of Eden, intimations of the way God intended and intends for them to be, moments where the goodness of work comes through. As thoroughly as sin has infiltrated this world, maybe the real question is, how is it ever the case that work works? How are there moments like that at all? And that, of course, is the topic of the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Extreme Stewardship Podcast. My name is Michael Kibbe, and I teach Bible and theology at Great Northern University in Spokane, Washington. My behind-the-scenes partner in this project is my brother, Ben Kibbe. Our editor-in-chief is Annalise Stockton. Art comes from Leah Leanhoutz, and of course, music is provided by Dave Murray of Daradoon Guitars. If this series has been helpful or challenging to you, or if you've got a story about extreme stewardship that you'd be willing to share, shoot us an email, extremestewards@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. You are, of course, welcome to like and subscribe and tell your friends and all that.
What we really care about is that you have gotten better at making things good and good at making things better.